Have you ever felt like you're living with a human thunderstorm? You know, one minute everything's fine, and the next, a tiny little problem triggers this huge explosion of energy and anger. If that sounds even vaguely familiar, chances are you've met the choleric temperament. And in this explainer, we're going to decode that fire, not to put it out, but to actually understand it. Okay, let's get into it. Right, let's just start with a statement that probably feels completely counterintuitive in the heat of the moment. Their anger, it isn't always about you. Actually, you know what? Most of the time, it's not about you at all. It's about how their very specific biological and psychological wiring processes stress, obstacles, and, well, the world. I mean, we've all been here, right? This little exchange is the classic signature of a choleric moment. One person feels the outburst as a deeply personal attack, while the other sees it as just a necessary tool for action, a force to blast through a problem. It's this fundamental misunderstanding that we are going to unpack. So, to really get to the bottom of this, we need to do a little anatomy of that explosion. What is actually happening under the hood when a minor frustration turns into a massive emotional event? What's the chain reaction that leads to that blast? It seems like the most logical thing in the world to say, doesn't it? Calm down. But telling a choleric to calm down in the middle of an outburst, it's like throwing a bucket of water on a grease fire. It doesn't just fail, it makes the whole situation so much worse. The real question is, why? Why does our most natural instinct have the absolute opposite effect? For centuries, really, this kind of explosive personality was just written off as a character flaw, right? A simple lack of self-control. But modern science tells a very different story. We're going to explore this idea that this isn't about bad manners, it's about biology. That it's not really a choice, but a deep-seated physiological and psychological need. So let's start with the biological hardware. Think of temperament as the nervous system's factory settings. Some of us are built for calm, steady processing. The choleric, on the other hand, is built for speed and power. They're like a Ferrari, but one that came from the factory with really ineffective brakes. The psychologist Hans Eysenck's model gives us our first big clue. High extroversion just means their energy naturally flows outwards, into the world. High neuroticism, which is just a technical way of saying high emotional sensitivity, means they have a really powerful, intense reaction to things. So you put those two together, and what do you get? You get a person who reacts to the world intensely and directs all of that intensity outwards. And this is not some new idea. Way back, the famous physiologist Ivan Pavlov identified a very specific type of nervous system he called strong unbalanced. As you can see here, it's defined by one thing: excitation completely dominating inhibition. To put it simply, their gas pedal is way stronger than their brake pedal. This makes it almost impossible for them to stop once they get going. But that just begs the question, what's the point of all that unstoppable forward momentum? And this is where the work of Dr. Gabor Mate gives us such a crucial insight. He explains that for this temperament, that outward explosion of anger isn't just an emotion, it's a physiological release. It's a valve. Trying to suppress that energy, to hold it in, actually increases their internal anxiety and stress. The outburst, as chaotic and messy as it looks from the outside, is their system's fastest way of getting back to normal. And this shows you exactly how that process works. First, some problem triggers the body's alarm system, the HPA axis. Instantly, the body is flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, those classic fight or flight hormones. Now, for most of us, the brake pedal, that inhibition process, kicks in to manage the surge. But for the choleric's unbalanced system, the quickest way to discharge that massive buildup of energy is through an external explosion. The yelling, the intense gestures, it literally, physically burns off the stress hormones, and that's what brings the feeling of relief. Okay, so if that's the hardware they're born with, what kind of psychological software runs on it? How does a person who is wired for action and excitation learn to see the world? This brings us to their psychological operating system, the worldview that makes sense on top of this unique hardware. The psychoanalyst Karen Horney gave us the perfect term for this. She called it a strategy of moving against people. Now, this doesn't mean being antisocial or mean. It's about taking a proactive, even aggressive stance toward life's problems as the primary way to manage a deep-seated anxiety and feel safe. And here are the core beliefs of that worldview. For them, life is a Darwinian jungle, not a safe, cozy harbor. Survival depends on being strong and being competent. Weakness is a liability. It actually invites danger.
So in this world, anger stops being just an emotion. It becomes a strategic tool, the most efficient way they know to remove obstacles, assert control, and push forward to a solution.
So now we have the biological hardware and the psychological software. And when we put them together, we can finally understand why the calm down strategy is such a spectacular disaster. It triggers a vicious, self-perpetuating conflict loop. And this is the crucial point. When a choleric is in that high energy problem solving mode and you try to pacify them, they don't hear, I care about you, I'm trying to help. No, they hear, stop trying to solve the problem. They interpret your attempt to de-escalate as a new obstacle, as a sign that you don't care, or even worse, as an attack on their competence. This lays out the whole disastrous cycle perfectly. A problem triggers their intense reaction and bam, they're in action mode. Their partner, trying to be helpful, says, calm down. The choleric now perceives their partner as the new obstacle blocking the solution. And so what happens? Their frustration and anger actually escalate to overcome this new block. You've just accidentally made yourself part of the problem they're trying to solve. And this quote, which Dr. Mate cites, really gets to the heart of the choleric's own experience. The outburst isn't the problem. For their system, it's the solution. For them, the expression of anger is the one thing that makes that unbearable feeling of anxiety finally go away. It brings back a sense of power and control in a world that feels threatening. Okay, so now that we understand the mechanics behind the explosion, let's get practical. How do you actually live with this energy without constantly getting burned? How do you survive the storm and maybe even learn to appreciate the lightning? Probably the most helpful metaphor you can use is to think of their anger not as a forest fire that burns for weeks, but as a sudden summer thunderstorm. It is incredibly intense, it's loud, it can be scary, but it arrives in a flash, and most importantly, it passes just as quickly. So here's a little cheat sheet for what to do when that storm rolls in. Instead of telling them to calm down, just give them some space to vent that energy. Instead of meeting their anger with passive withdrawal, try to acknowledge the problem that they're so fixated on. And most crucially, instead of taking the explosion personally, try to focus on the solution they're so desperately trying to get to. Don't try to extinguish the fire, just let the storm pass on its own. So here it is, your survival guide in a nutshell. First and foremost, don't stand in the path of the train. Just let them release the pressure. Second, do your absolute best not to take it personally. Remember, this is their hardware processing stress. Third, try to see their anger for what it is, a tool for action. And remember this vital point. Once the storm passes, they move on. Completely. For the choleric, when the pressure is gone, the event is over. They don't hold grudges. The real key is to learn to appreciate their strength and their drive, which is the powerful flip side of all that intensity. And that really leads us to a final provocative thought. We so often see this intensity as a flaw, as something that needs to be fixed. But what if we reframed it? That same drive that creates explosions over small things at home is exactly what makes them unstoppable leaders, fierce protectors, and relentless problem solvers out in the world. What if their greatest challenge is simply the price of their greatest strength?